אני רץ.
Shalom. We're going to deal today with a book that is called Are the Trees in Bloom over there, that was written by two survivors from the Holocaust. One, his name is Fred, and the other brother, his name is Menachem. At the period of the Holocaust, when both of them were children, they were called Manfred and Heinz. The two brothers didn't meet each other for 26 years after the Holocaust, but after they met, and a few years ago, they decided to write their memories in a book, and they talk about two reasons why they wanted to write the book. One reason that they talk about, they say first because these events and our response to them had shaped our lives and our worldview. What does this mean? This means that people who survived the Holocaust didn't end in 1945. This means that the Holocaust shaped all their lives afterwards. It's not that you return to life as it was before the Holocaust, because after the experience they went through the Holocaust, all the worldview changed. And I must say that even for us, that we were not born in the period of the Holocaust shapes a lot in Western civilization and in civilization as a whole. The Holocaust is part of the memory. The Holocaust, I would say, shapes a lot of the worldview of anyone living in civilization today. That's why it's so important for us to learn their experience at that period of time, because we learn a lot about the world that we're living after the Holocaust happened. The second reason they talk about that they want to write this book is because anti-Semitism and intolerance are still with us today. And many bad things are happening in the world because it's continuing. And we see what they write about. They say innocent people are still being killed. Hatred is still there because of religious and other differences between people. So it means through sensitizing ourselves, talking about their experience, talking about the book, we can actually think about things that are happening today in civilization also. It's interesting why the children of Fred and Menachem recommend this book. They recommend this book for a different reason. Look what they say. They say, we learned the inner strength that a mother needs to write a final letter to her little children when she knows she will probably never see them again. They speak about getting to know the human face of their grandmother when she had to separate from her children, and they talk a lot about the inner strength they learned from her behavior in the everyday life and took it to their world. And they especially described now their parents, how they learned from that. So you see, there are several reasons that are not related only to the history of the Holocaust, that this book is so important for us. And let's begin the journey with them. And we're talking here about life before the Holocaust. You can see here the town that they were born, that's called Hoffenheim, in where we call it the southwest, it's in southwest Germany. It's a very small town. Only about 1,440 people were living there. 3% of them were Jewish. Now let's see how they describe their childhood. I like the first part of how they describe it, and it's written here. Everything is leafy and green. When you talk about your home, when you talk about your childhood, when you talk about the world that you are protected, you talk about the view, you talk about what makes a home, and the second thing they talk about is the family that was very cozy, and they say, I remember sitting on father's lap on the Shabbat while he told me stories. The family was cozily together. A normal, regular family. Look at the parents that were married in 1927 and had 2 children, and we can just imagine ourselves sitting together, cozy. Look how they describe their mother. I remember mother had a very long brown hair, which gathered up in a band, and the mother was playing the harp. They used to sit together. But they tell us something else also about the world they grew in. They talk about the identity. And look what we wrote here. German, Jewish identity. I think this was 2 parts of them. They lived in a German society. We see here that the father was a soldier during World War I. What means to be a soldier? We see afterwards that he got also all sorts of prizes for being very brave in that war. Nearly 200,000 Jews fought as patriotic Germans in World War I. And father of the boys was one of them, and he used to sit and tell them stories about what happened, him being part of the identity. Let's look at the mother and her identity. She also was singing famous German song, Lorelei, when they used to sit cozy together. They saw themselves part of the society. Let's go on. Mother gave me a very Germanic name, Manfred. When I asked why she chose that name, she replied it was very popular because she heard her neighbor call her son Manfred. So we can see that the Jews live with the neighbors. They are a very small proportion of Jews living in Hoffenheim, and they are part of the German society. But let's see also the Jewish part of their life. And this we can see, we see the synagogue here, and they were living next to the synagogue. And look what Fred says about his father. Father was a part-time cantor in the shrinking community. The community was a very small community, but they still had service in the synagogue every Friday night and Shabbat. I remember father leading the congregation in prayer during Friday evening and Shabbat service. So we can see here really when the Jews in Germany say, I'm Jewish and I'm German and they're both equal, we can see it really in the story of the family we're meeting here. Let's see another thing that resembles also the life. In the early years, we would visit their neighbors. Visit their neighbors, play together. We all read the book here and we see how do you treat neighbors? How do you feel that people are very intimate one in each other? When something is small on you, you give the neighbor the clothes. This is living like a family together. But all of this changed when the Nazis came to power. And it began with the neighbors. Look what they write here. Before it became too risky, we used to go to the neighbors before it became too risky for them to associate with us. Immediately, friends that lived like family before that lived in a small town, were beginning to separate one each other. You can't visit him as a neighbor anymore. And let's see how it affected other parts of their life. Children like to go to the pool. Children like to play outside together. So Manfred and Heinz used to go to the pool. And look what happened there when they met now enemies, but children that were friends until yesterday. They said everyone yelled, drown the Jew boys. They begin to be the other. They begin to be the outcasts. They begin to be the ones who people don't want to associate with them. And more that, they even torture them. It begins with games, but then it gets very violent. And let's see how they describe it also. They go to school. They all go to school together. Look at this picture when Heinz is 3 years old. He's together in the kindergarten with his friends. But what happens when the Nazis come to power? It was never pleasant anymore. Horrible experience. German children were constantly exposed to Nazi propaganda, and they began what we learn here, beating them and calling all sorts of racist names to them and anti-Semitic, of course, stereotypes against them. But you know what they say that they must humiliate by? I do not recall a single incident where an adult witnessing the daily bullying tried to prevent the other kids from beating me up. Look what a child says to a grown-up person. Okay, if the children were maybe bullying them, they didn't know better. But the fact that the adults that were the parents' friends didn't say anything when the children were bullying them, this is left with them as something that they want to describe the humiliation and the dehumanization they had to go through. And look, in 1937, the Ministry of Education forbade Jewish children to attend public schools. So what happens to Manfred? He has to go to a Jewish school in Heidelberg, 20 kilometers from the place he's living in Hoffenheim. But he says, in a way, it was best for me. Why? Because I was anonymous now. No one called me names, no one beat me. Now this is very heartbreaking. What is children's life and every day when we see playing together with other children, associating together? When is a Jewish child protected in Germany in the 30s? Only when no one knows he is Jewish. And this is very important to us to see the stages. And then comes Kristallnacht, in what we call Kristallnacht pogrom, in November 1938. We know that what happened in that pogrom was that more than 1,000 synagogues were set on fire. We saw the synagogue before that. We know what it was then. 7,000 Jewish businesses were damaged and destroyed. 100 men were killed. 30,000 men were taken to concentration camp. And what happens in the Meyer family that are living in Hoffenberg? So Manfred says he comes back from the school that now we know is 20 kilometers away. And what does he see? He sees the mother pushing a cart, piled high with clothes and bedding, because they have to move away. The synagogue was destroyed, and the flat was next to the synagogue. They have to look for a new home. And look how he describes it. He says, furniture and household objects lay scattered in the street. You throw a person out of his home. What did they describe life before the war in Hoffenheim? What they described was home, the house, the neighbors, the surrounding, the protection of the everyday life. And now everything is thrown in the street. No one actually protects them. And what again is he humiliated so about? He describes that he sees not only local Nazis, but men that were in school with the father. What were they doing? They were standing up above, and some of them were comrades of the father in First World War. They were standing up above on the roof, which they were busy with great enthusiasm, the pleasure which they appealed themselves to the work was so painful to see. So you see, the pain is not only from the torturing. The pain was the fact that the Jews in Hoffenheim felt abandoned from the people. They felt that they are one society together with them. And this is what they describe in life before the war. And here we can see really, we saw the synagogue, and look how the synagogue looks after it's really destroyed, and they are actually very vulnerable. And this brings us to the next stage afterwards. What happens? The father was taken to the concentration camp Dachau. He was one of the 30,000 men that was taken there. And why was he released earlier than others? Because of connection made by German veterans of World War I. You see, they have a problem. The Germans themselves, with the Jews that were so patriotic in World War I, afterwards they don't care about it, and every Jew will be killed because he has one Jewish grandfather. But still in the 30s, relatives, they remembered them as their colleagues, as they remembered them as their brothers that fought together in World War I, and they still took it in consideration. But let's continue. 1940, the Germans invade France on May 1940. And what actually happens in France? They divide France into two. The north side of France is under military German control, and 40%, like we see in the map here, of France is under the puppet government called Vichy, that in a way collaborates with the Nazis. They built a camp here called Gers. And who is deported in October 1940 to the camp here? The Jews from Baden. And part of Baden is the Jews from Hoffenheim. It was 6,500 Jews that were deported to the camp in Gers. And what do they tell us about how they deported them one day? What do the brothers tell us? How was that deportation? He said, terrifying element entered to our lives. At 8 in the morning, 2 members of the Gestapo instructed us to be prepared to leave within 2 hours. You don't have time to think about anything. You can take a very small amount of money and you're deported. And what they tell us is we didn't know where our destination, and they certainly didn't explain why it had become necessary for us to leave our home. They're being deported someplace in 2 hours. You don't know where the destination is. This is part of the system. And 6,500 people find themselves in 9 trains without water or food, deported to France, to the Camp Gers. I'm not going to go to all the historical reasons why they were deported, but what we know is that the commander of the area of Baden, he was very enthusiastic to show that he's a very patriotic German, and by deporting the Jews from that area and cleaning the place from Jews, he was very proud to show his mission. And the Jews, and among them our family, the Meyer family, enter the camp in Gers. But before that, something they remember. They remember the father shouting, "Is this why I fought in the war when the Gestapo came there?" He took out his service rewards, including the Iron Cross, and angrily threw it at the feet of the Gestapo that deported him. The interesting thing that I want you to think about afterwards, and maybe change your idea about it with your peers afterwards, is what they write here. They were embarrassed and remained silent. They're doing their work, they're deporting these people, but they're still embarrassed when they look eye to eye with the father, and when he throws all the rewards he got in World War I. So I think we have to think to ourselves, why are they embarrassed? And if they're embarrassed, why don't they stop doing what they do? Why do they continue it more and more? And now we have the description of the camping Gers. They enter Gers. Look what's a camp that they remember. You know, I think a day before that, they were still living. Yes, they didn't live a very comfortable life in Hoffenheim, but they still lived as a family. And now they enter the camp in France, surrounded by barbed wire with lots of wooden barracks. Women and men were separated. The younger children were permitted to remember with their mothers. Winter, rain, damp, cold, barracks that are completely bare. What is the state they get into? Shock. They describe to enter the camp is shock. What's going to be? How will we survive here? More than than that. You go out of the barracks outside, you sink into the mud. It was a swampland, they called it. And can you imagine little children that were deported with their parents to the camp, and they say the mud came up to our knees. And just thinking about the children that were so vulnerable, and they explain it was hard working, dragging out anyone who was misfortune to fall in. Some people used to sink into the mud and couldn't survive afterwards. But look, what they described that happened to the older people. Old people found it almost impossible to get to the toilet facilities. Everyone who survived clearly remembers the mud of gears. This is entering the world of dehumanization. And the parents enter there with the children. That's why they come, after a while, to this decision. One day, our parents told us they had given their permission for us to be taken from the camp. There were organization, a Jewish organization named the Ozeh, to save children in France in different places, with other organizations that helped them, like the Quakers and others. And they asked permission from their parents to take the children out to different places and to find a place that they can survive to. So they said, the parents said it would be better for us because the camp conditions, we already know. They couldn't live there. What's interesting here is that they say we don't remember how we felt or how we reacted to these news. Now this is very interesting. They don't remember because it's too painful to remember that, this separation. And let's understand why it was so tragic. You know, it seems very logical that because of the conditions we learned about the camp, the parents will immediately give permission to the organization to take the children out of the camp. But we learn here a very interesting thing. The parents, Karl and Matilda, the parents of Heinz and Manfred, were the minority. Most of the parents were unable to foresee what lay ahead. They refused to part with their children. This is very interesting. What happens in times of danger and fear? We usually cling one to each other. We don't want to separate. The only way they could maybe save their children was to separate in time of danger. This is not natural. And especially what we learn here, the parents that didn't let their children go, all of them perished in Auschwitz. At that period of time in 1940, they do not know that in 2 years they're going to be in the death camp. All they know is something very rational, that they have to cling one to each other and help one to each other. So we can see that the parents had a very big dilemma. And how do we see how they were miserable? We see it with the separation. What they say, I remember father lifting me up into the truck and gazing into my eyes. I think the phrase gazing into my eyes explains us how it was difficult for him, how he had to disconnect himself from kind of feelings. And from the mother, they didn't even have time to separate. We didn't have a chance to say goodbye to our mother because the truck didn't wait, but I can still see her standing on the wooden bridge and waving to us as the truck passed. So we can see that when we talk about moral dilemmas in the Holocaust, we actually talk about the necessity to choose in the world of choices. And the parents are trying to do what's best to our children, but now from the letters they write them, we will learn how it's difficult. And let's talk about the letters. Between March 1941 and August 1942, 40 letters were written by the parents to the children that were in Aspen in an orphanage in France. And some of the letters were written by relatives. I think we can learn about 5 things from the messages we have in these letters. First of all, the first very interesting message that appears in most of the 40s letters is what's written here in the first line. The parents write, "We were very happy to receive your letter. I was especially happy to read that you are well." In most of the letters, the parents open it and say, "We're happy to see you are well." Maybe it comforts them for the decision they made to separate from their children when they see that actually the children are well. The second thing that appears in these letters is that the parents want to continue to be parents. They're concerned about the physical condition of their children. They are concerned about the schooling. They had a very strong message, the parents. This is very interesting. Studying and schooling is a very important thing in life. It's very interesting that the father we learn about at the beginning didn't even graduate elementary school, but it was very important for him to deliver the legacy of how important education is. The third thing we see in the letters is that they're trying to remind them also about the past, about the homes that they came in, that they have a legacy, that they have an identity, even they're living now in the dehumanized world. They're trying to build them also a future and talk to them about the future and send their legacy to the future. And I think the most heartbreaking is that their parents share their dehumanization with their children. You know, usually parents protect children from horrors. In the Holocaust, the world changed, and we see it in the letters here. Children became adults, and they comfort their parents. So it's also something that we can learn from these letters. And let's go over the letters together and see some of the things I was talking about appearing in the letters. So the letter here is from Riversell, a camp that they were deported after Gears, and they write it in August 1941. It begins, as I said, "We were very happy to receive your letter. It was especially happy to read that you are well." And now the second thing is the mother is sharing her concern with the children. She's saying, "Father was taken from here with more than 100 other men. 3 weeks have passed and I still haven't heard from him. They say they were taken to work. Why do I say, what do I say to this?" She's asking her children for answers. If only we knew where they were. But then immediately she becomes a mother. What do you get to eat? Do you get cooked meals like you had at home? She's reminding them for the cozy, nice life they had once. And she's also very concerned about what's happening to them now. Then she's continuing to share her problems. "Lately, I have been suffering quite badly from diarrhea." We know afterwards from other letters that the diarrhea really caught the mother, and she weighed not more than 41 kilos. So she's telling them about it. And then she's very concerned if they're going to immigrate someplace. What's happening with you? Let's see another, still in this letter, if you can show, look at what's written here. Letter written by mother, and we see here a dried flower here. She's trying to bring them something intimate, something that the mother can send children in this kind of life. So let's continue. Another letter. "We received your letters together with Hanukkah gifts." This is very interesting. You know, now we're celebrating at this part of the year, Hanukkah. It's one of the Jewish holidays. And one custom in the festival of Hanukkah is that usually parents give presents to their children. What's happening in that period of time in the Holocaust? We received your Hanukkah gifts. The children are sending presents to their parents. Another thing the mother is writing about, best wishes for your birthday and your bar mitzvah. A birthday is usually something that parents celebrate for children as young as Heinz and Manfred that are maybe 11 years old and 13 years old now. And the most heartbreaking thing, I think, also here is that she is blessing Manfred for his bar mitzvah. A bar mitzvah is the custom in the Jewish world that when you enter the age of 13, the parents hand you like to the community, and you in the press, in the synagogue, can take part as a member of the community. It's usually being done by the parents as a process of the child becoming a man. And usually the parents are part of this celebration. They celebrate it to their children. It's called bar mitzvah. Here, the mother can't be with her son on, I think, the most important day in his life, when he's becoming 13, part of the Jewish community, and he has a bar mitzvah. So she's sending him wishes for it. Another thing she immediately writes about. We were happy to read that you are healthy and you learn about your, and to learn about your school reports. We can ask ourselves a question: who cares about school reports and the life of their humanization? The only thing maybe it's important to care about is food. No, they want their children, they're preparing them for the future. They want to keep them as human beings, they want to give them education, and we can really learn the value of education in this kind of world. I see, Hans, that you enjoy school. Can you send us anything? And then they're looking for something for them, maybe even food. So they're continuing to be parents, and on the other hand, they need the children to support them. She talks about her diarrhea again, and then she's concerned about Hans. A minute ago, she asked him to help her, but now she says, what do you get to eat? What has Hans done with all the shoes I gave him? If the shoes are small on him, send them here and I'll sell them. How can it be that you don't have boots? What is your shoe size? How are your socks? I'm sure they're torn by now. This is so motherly. This is so much strength, like the grandchildren learn from afterwards of this grandmother, Matilda. How can you, with all this diarrhea, with all this dehumanization, with all the problems with your husband, when you don't know where he is, still be concerned about the everyday things? And then comes the thing of identity. Now about your Jewish names. Manfred is Meir bar Clonimus, and Heinz is Menachem bar Clonimus. Write them down. German, Jewish identity, what will become of these children that were born in Germany, had this kind of identity. Now she's telling them maybe the world has changed afterwards. We said the worldview of these children will be changed. Will they go back to Germany and become German again? Will they look for other places in the world? What is waiting for these two boys actually in the world? And then the last letter. Just a few lines before we leave, on August 1942, they're deported to Auschwitz, the parents. We don't know where we're going. We don't at least regard leaving you behind. You are safer where you are. At least the boys know that the parents are very happy. Perhaps you'll hear everything. Be well, all the best, and kisses from your mother. Dear Manfred and Heinz, be good to one each other. That's my greatest concern. And we can see here the deportation to the death camp Auschwitz. The mother's will is that they should look one for each other and take care one of each other. Let's see what happens to them after the Holocaust. Menachem Heinz, after the war was over, he was influenced by his councils and his teachers and became very Zionistic, and wanted to go only to what was Palestine there, what is the state of Israel today. But it's very interesting. This was when he parted from his brother. They actually parted, the two boys, before that. But the boys, after the Holocaust, did have a chance to immigrate together to one place, but we can see that they had two messages out of the Holocaust. As we see here, the message of Heinz that became Menachem is the Israeli state, the continuation, to be committed to the Jewish world, but the message of Fred was very different. He says, why did I go to Palestine? Foremost was a feeling had grown in me over the years that being Jewish was not healthy. He wants to immigrate to America for something very universal, to build a new life, not to deal with the things that brought upon him the Holocaust because he was actually Jewish. He says something very interesting that he didn't know if this would be his choice today, that he might have changed it today. He's, I think, much more back into his Jewish identity, especially after meeting his brother and them going together to Auschwitz and their families meeting together. But it's very interesting to see that his message was to disconnect himself. And there's also something interesting, something interesting that Menachem tells us. I know Menachem. Menachem was the teacher of my husband, the science teacher of my husband in school. And he says he was a very, very committed a Jewish Orthodox person. But it's interesting what he writes here. He says, I don't know if it was the right decision that we two brothers won't be together. And he's actually coming out and asking the question, didn't people understand that you don't separate two brothers, even if that's what we wanted? So I think what we see here, that survivors live with mixed feelings. On one hand, that's what he wanted them, and he's very committed to the life he chose. But on the other hand, did anyone look after us? Didn't anyone have to interfere in the decision of two boys? He's also coming out with several questions that the survivors, especially the ones with children, want to ask the world after the Holocaust. And another thing that they live in their legacy, you remember that their parents were very concerned with their education. And here we can see, although each of them chose a different path in life, one became a space engineer and lived in America. The other one lived in Israel, although he dealt also with science. But look what they say about one of the messages they got from their parents about education. For several years, in addition to my daily routine, I studied towards teaching diploma in science. And he says he was living in Haifa. Twice a week I walked 5 kilometers down the hill to the old fiber road and called a bus to school when he had already children. The importance of education. The parents began with the legacy before the war. They continued the legacy about education in their letters, and it's in him. Fred also. Fred enters America and he meets an uncle that asked him if he wanted to become what he wants to do with himself. He says, I was hoping to go to high school. Nonsense, you'll be a butcher, he said, his relative. I said, I certainly did not want to be a butcher. And he says, I worked from 8 to 5, and then traveled to school in a subway on a bus to study. You see, here in America, here in Israel, take the legacy of their parents that education is so important. Both of them married, both of them have children, grandchildren. And I think that this is the legacy that from the parents, even though they were children in the Holocaust, even though they were separated from their parents, so much of what their parents put in them before the war, writing the letters in the war, comes out from their life after the Holocaust. And I think we can learn a lot of the meaning of their story to us as human beings and as people living in the world.